So the goal today is for both Bryant and Soonjo to talk about their experiences in the Scholar program and how the Scholar program has served them in their path towards independence and career development. So I think we'll start with Dr. England. I'm going to turn over to you, Bryant. And so thanks both of you for helping us out today.
All right, well, thanks for the introduction. Hopefully people can see my screen.
Looks good.
All right. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, the ability to talk here. So my main disclosure is just that, after participating in the Scholars program, largely going to have good things to say about the Scholars program. Otherwise, no other relevant disclosures. Obligatory objectives, which really can just be summarized down to, we're going to talk about getting started in research and some of the resources available to help through those steps. So when I came into the Scholars program, I came in basically with a project focused on this question: can you treat this patient's rheumatoid arthritis? And so you look at this patient and she looks pretty darn healthy. She looks pretty darn happy. You can almost write the narrative that it's, it's a Sunday morning, she's waking up, it's sunny outside, they're gonna go have some brunch. I mean, yeah, it seems like that's a pretty easy patient to take care of. And this is the type of patient that, when you go home in the evening and turn on the TV, this is the patient you see on TV. But the problem is when we went into clinic, frequently we saw a patient like this. And it was a lot more difficult to take care of this patient's rheumatoid arthritis because, well, they had some underlying lung disease using an inhaler and an oxygen. They're obese. They have this cane, so maybe they have some concomitant, degenerative joint changes. And not surprisingly, this is not the patient you see on an RA treatment commercial. And so I was really struck by this discordance of, the patients that we're seeing, we don't necessarily have this great data from the clinical trials like we see on TV. And when I thought about what really made this the hard patient to take care of, it wasn't even so much it was the rheumatoid arthritis, it was these other conditions that were affecting this patient. And so that really led me to this idea of studying multimorbidity and rheumatoid arthritis. And so when I went into the Scholars Project, I lifted these from my proposal. So, I had this long-term goal of, doing outcomes research in patients with rheumatoid arthritis, using big data to study multimorbidity and not focusing so much on how do I make this patient better in 6 months or a year, like in a clinical trial, but how do we improve their lifespan and their quality of life and functional status over the long term. And so we'd hypothesized that, multimorbidity could mean a lot of different things. And that perhaps by using the big data that we have and continue to generate on a daily basis, we can identify some unique patterns of multimorbidity that might help us take care of these patients. And so this is sort of that framework that we were working with, is that in multimorbidity, you have the patient that's the center of an evil web of all their other diseases. And what makes it an interesting thing to study is that these diseases don't affect the patient in isolation, but there are interactions between RA and lung disease, RA and cardiovascular disease. There are links between obesity and cardiovascular disease independent of rheumatoid arthritis. And so you begin to see there's this network by which different pathological mechanisms can contribute to how patients do over the long term. And so underneath that, you see a figure representing some of the work that we've been doing over these last few years. So if we go through and we measure 44 different conditions that might be affecting patients, and we look at those relationships between those 44 conditions, and then cluster patients based on how those different combinations of conditions occur, we ended up where we can separate people out into about 4 different clusters of multimorbidity. A cluster of healthy people, a cluster of people with moderate multimorbidity, a cluster with severe multimorbidity, and then a unique cluster of multimorbidity that's really characterized by mental health and chronic pain disorders. So again, starting to see how we went from our model of framework at the beginning in the proposal to what we're starting to generate towards the end. But really the point of this talk is not to talk about the science, but that's just kind of a little segue into how we got to here, the Great Plains IDeA-CTR scholars. And so what I'd seen someone else do before in a similar type of talk was just put together their timeline. And so this is what my timeline looks like from sort of a 10,000-foot view. So I got started in research as a resident in internal medicine. And I got started on an initial project. And then I made my way down to meet with Dr. Michaels. And in a brief lapse of judgment, he decided to take me on as a trainee. And when he did so, he encouraged me not just to start a project, but also to pursue securing some funding to support some extra time for research. And so I was lucky enough to get this foundation award, which protected 3 months of my time as a third-year internal medicine resident to really devote to research. And during that time, I was able to build some initial clinical research skills that have been, really the groundwork for a lot of the stuff that I've built upon. So when I started fellowship in 2015, I started initially in a master's program, but transitioned to a PhD program through the Mentored Scholars Program. And so that program, run by Chi-Chi Zimmerman, I don't know if she's on the call, but it's really geared for clinical, persons to transition and complement their clinical training with research training. And so that has been a fantastic program and something I strongly encourage people to look into. And I believe the UNMC today just had a call out for reminding people the deadline for that is the end of April. So then in fellowship, I pursued research training and also started, more substantial grant writing. I was able to get some internal grant funding through the Physician Scientist Training Program and the Departmental Scientist Development Award. And then as I was finishing fellowship, I was able to secure a Foundation Scientist Development Award as well. But in the fall of 2017, the Great Plains IDEA-CTR Scholars RFA came open, and really was an opportunity for me to take this concept of multimorbidity and propose some things that weren't going to be possible through these other grant mechanisms and build some unique collaborations. I was lucky enough to get that award, and I feel like that's been a huge turning point for allowing me to build forward, a career in clinical research. After that award, there was a lot of time just of, really trying to get projects completed and laying the groundwork for sort of the next grants to follow. And so I was able to get a competitive third-year renewal on my Scientist Development Award through the Foundation. There were some scattered pilot awards during this time as well. And then last year was able to secure a VA Career Development Award. And then I have a couple industry supportive awards that are being prepared and reviewed right now. What's not on here though are the misses, and part of it's maybe that it's still too soon to talk about the misses, but there were certainly plenty of those as well. So after I started fellowship, I wrote an F-32 that was not funded. I took a shot at the Foundation Scientist Development Award that I got here. I tried that a year earlier and that was not funded. Prior to my VA Career Development Award, right before that, I submitted a K-23 that was based on a similar proposal, and that unfortunately was scored but did not meet the funding threshold. And so there certainly have been misses as well, and part of getting started is getting comfortable with those misses. Now, one of the things I think that highlights how important the IDEA Scholars Program is looking at some of the research productivity. And so if you look at, this time during residency and fellowship before I got this IDEA-CTR Scholars Award, you can see there were a couple of publications that I was able to generate per year. But after getting the Scholars Award, which really protected a substantial proportion of my time to do research, there was a big jump. It's a combination of the protected time, the resources, the teams, and the science that I was able to do that allowed me to be much more productive. And that was really important. And this productivity was something that was called out in both the K-23 and the VA Career Development Award applications. So the other thing that grew in parallel was my research network. So if you look back at the beginning, there was just this island, me and Dr. Michaels on an island, and he was rapidly trying to get off that island. But a couple years later, that island started to grow a little bit. And I started tapping into a network that was really the network of my mentors. But he brought me into his network. And then over time, as we continued with projects and started to build up a few useful skills for other people, that network continued to grow into where there are a lot of this network still remains connections from my mentor, but also a few connections that are outside of my mentor, kind of showing the potential ultimately to develop into independent research career. The other thing that grew along with that was the research mentoring team. So back in 2015, Dr. Michaels and Dr. Mishu were my two primary mentors for research. By the time I finished fellowship, that had started to grow a little bit. So Dr. Thiel and Dr. Yu, both here at UNMC, were brought onto my research mentoring team, and both of them served on my PhD committee. But then also we started to bring in some external people. So Josh Baker from the University of Pennsylvania, Jeff Curtis from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, both had some very similar research interests and expertise that could complement others on my mentoring team. And then a few years later, as research has continued to progress, the mentoring team has continued to grow. And not only has it grown, but also the relationships of the mentoring team have changed a little bit. There have been times that have been more heavy, relying on mentoring from certain individuals, and other times not as much. So we've continued to bring in external people as projects have grown and evolved over time. I want to highlight Christian Haas here, who's from UNO, and bringing him on the mentoring team was really a direct result of the Scholars Program. So what we had proposed was some fancy multivariate machine learning approaches that I realized I would need training in, and we happen to have expertise down the road. And so working with Christian was a great way for him to kind of tutor me and mentor me in how to conduct some of these advanced machine learning approaches, tools that are really helpful and continue to be helpful as ongoing projects pop up. The other thing that has happened early on is, and will happen for most people, is this beginning to establish your research area. And as I thought about this, I realized that this was not very intentional on my part. It just sort of happened. And I suspect that's the case for a lot of people, that your research area is a combination of things you're interested in, but also things that just sort of pop up over time. So my very early projects were really centered around comorbidities and rheumatoid arthritis and in mortality. And then as I went through fellowship, I did a lot of work using some of those same data sets and skills I built early on to investigate several different predictors of mortality in rheumatoid arthritis. Then some of the initial grants that I got were beginning to look at lung disease, because what we'd found was that lung disease was really the cause of death that was most overrepresented in rheumatoid arthritis patients. And so we spent some time trying to identify RA lung disease in large data sets, identifying novel biomarkers, and looking at the prognosis related to lung disease. Then through the Scholars Award, there was a little bit of a shift. So a little bit of realizing this is very focused, but a lot of the patients I see in clinic, it's not just lung disease, it's all their other conditions. And so a little shift to multimorbidity. And then actually my most recent CDA has again focused in on RA-associated lung diseases. And so as I looked back at these periods in time, I started to see, based on my publications, where my areas really have gone. And there is certainly an area of multimorbidity in rheumatoid arthritis, an area of RA lung disease, and then also an area just of epidemiologic and outcomes research in rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases. And this, this extra piece has not necessarily been by any of my funded work, but through PhD training and skills learned in these projects have allowed some versatility to be in that ball field as well. One of the nice things by having a few different areas is when you hit a roadblock, you have a backup plan. Not all of your eggs are in one basket. The other nice thing is you can see sort of this alternating pattern of multimorbidity versus lung disease. And by having those staggered a little bit, the nice thing is it gives you plenty of time to take your findings and get those studies published, have really solid preliminary data that sets up the next grant in that area. If you only have a 1 or 2 year award, it can be really challenging to conduct your research, have the studies out, published or presented, and then also have a grant application prepared for the next grant that you can reference your own preliminary data as being published data. So that's a quick guide through sort of my early transition. And so now what I'm going to just switch to is a little bit of just some tips that I've learned as I've gone through that process. So for people who are getting started in clinical translational research, here's sort of the key steps. The first is you got to write grants. If you want to be a researcher, unfortunately, that requires writing grants to protect your time, to build your research team, to allow you to conduct the study, to collect the data, to analyze the data, etc. So grant writing, I personally don't find the funnest aspect, but it's something that absolutely we have to do, and it's something that gets better the more you do it. So just write grants, and write grants. The second piece is you got to write papers. So I think we as scientists frequently enjoy conducting our studies, seeing the results come, but again, there can be this block of actually taking what we generate and getting it onto paper or onto a word processor and getting it out in the journal. And it just becomes critical for us to get that stuff out and get it out quickly because it sets up everything else to follow. And so my mentor very early on was always, what are you writing? What are you writing? And when one paper went in, it was, well, what's the next one? What are you writing now? And so always have things that you are writing. If you do number 1 and number 2, you're going to learn number 3, which is learn to handle rejection, because your grants will be rejected, your papers will be rejected, even really, really good work will get rejected. There's just no way to predict it, and you just have to learn to roll with the flow, bounce back, and resubmit somewhere else, or take the feedback and improve your work. Now, to have time to write the grants and to write the papers, that means you're going to have to say no to something. And that can be really hard because frequently we got to where we are in our lives because we said yes. We said yes to opportunities and we worked really hard at them. But unfortunately, there's only so many hours of the day. And so what I'll tell people is saying no to something is actually saying yes to something else, and being careful not to commit to too many things on the spot. So it's totally fine to say, let me think about that opportunity and give it some careful consideration, and I'll get back to you, in a timely manner, and then follow through. And people will respect that if you've considered it and told them no. Now, to go through this transition, it is absolutely critical to have a mentoring team. So you first off need to have your primary mentor, someone that you trust, can work well with, and is available, and has the resources and expertise needed to help guide you in your transition. But frequently, you also need a mentoring team. So people who have other expertise outside of what your primary mentor has, so that you can start to develop some specific expertise that's different than your mentor. It also starts helping you build a research network of people you can collaborate with on studies. And one of the things that was exceedingly helpful for me getting launched in that way was getting plugged into a research network. So my mentor leads the Veterans Affairs Rheumatoid Arthritis Registry, which is over 16 different sites now. And so some of the early projects got me involved with that registry, and it went from overnight having no collaborators to all of a sudden having collaborators at 16 different centers. And then, through some of your early grant writing, one of the important things that you're going to find is starting to build your research team. As you start doing bigger and bigger projects, you realize you can't do absolutely everything. You can't, do everything with getting the IRB up and running. You can't do every aspect of data collection and then every aspect of data analysis and then write all the papers and be writing the next grant. Again, you run out of time. Or you may find that some of the stuff you're proposing to do is so innovative or challenging that you just don't have the expertise to do it. And so in those circumstances, you're going to have to start building your team to help you out. As you go through your projects, you're going to start building your research area and areas of expertise. This can be really helpful if you're plugged into a research network. And so early on, develop some skills in using big data, linking big data sets together. And as a result, really that became a resource, not just to me and the stuff I was doing, but it became a resource to this research network that was in place, to where people who had other important studies wanted to collaborate and get some of our help. And that was a great way of continuing to expand the impact of your work, getting fresh ideas and new collaborations, and building more of a research networking team. And similarly related is this sort of tongue-in-cheek last comment of becoming useful to the right people. And this really is just, again, kind of that balance of you need to develop some skills. You want to be collaborative in research, but also you have to remember that you got to protect some of your time to getting the work done that is crucial for you getting that next grant or completing the grant on your work. You can't totally, you spend all of your time supporting other people's research or taking on committees or administrative tasks or teaching tasks. There's only so many hours of the day, and if becoming an independent investigator is your goal, then you have to commit a substantial portion of your time and effort to writing those grants, doing the research, getting the papers out. So one of the things that, reflecting on was a bit of a challenge was this idea of building a research team. So having gone through clinical training, this isn't something we did at all. You went through medical school on sort of a plan. When you hit residency, every month you were placed in a new team with a strict hierarchy. You hit fellowship and you were kind of in this small group of people. And then instantly you transition out to where, okay, now go have a research team. And so I found that to be a somewhat challenging experience. So some of the things that I struggled with was, I didn't necessarily have the foresight to know what I would need in terms of a research team until I would get stuck. So I do a project, get it along, and then all of a sudden realize, oh man, I'm stuck. I can't move this forward at this point. And one of the classic examples I tell people is I was linking a bunch of big data within the VA, which does all this using a relational database structure. And you have to know SQL, a type of coding language, to link those together to use them. And so I bought this book. I think it's on my bookshelf still, a tiny little book about SQL. And I was like, I'll just teach myself to write some SQL code. And I started writing some SQL code and found out that you can bog down a computer grid really, really quickly if you don't know SQL. And you can get some nasty emails from people who run databases if you almost crash their databases with bad SQL code. So it was at that point, right in the middle of a research plan, that I realized, oh shoot, I'm stuck. Like I don't have the expertise to write the SQL code to build the data sets that I need to complete my research plan. Shortly after that, I learned lesson number 2 is that here at big institutions, the hiring process is not fast. You can't say one day, oh shoot, I need somebody who can help me write some SQL code. And then the next day you have somebody, interviewing for that process. There's a long process of putting together the position, getting the position approved, the hiring process, getting them onboarded, all that takes time. And so in retrospect, what I should have done was probably take better inventory of what I would be needing to complete this project and getting these things started earlier on. For people who are getting started, you may, especially if you don't have a lot of formal research training, you may find that your needs for who's on your research team are greater than the resources you have to support those personnel. And in those cases, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to think about relying on some of the resources of your mentor, maybe getting some support of your division, and learning how to do some of those things yourself. Once you bring your team on, then you have to continue to support your team. So some of the successes I had were completely independent of things I was doing. I had a great mentor, I had a great division, I had a lot of resources that were available for me. Was lucky enough to have some success early on with grants that supported expanding my research team. And then just by sheer luck, fantastic people joined my research team. So Punyasha Raul came on. She is a SQL expert and she's bailed me out so much. Yang Yuna Yang, she started as a graduate assistant and then I wouldn't let her go and kept her on, and she just does a fantastic job of analytics. And then Allison Peter is a study coordinator extraordinaire who is just on top of absolutely everything. So again, no skill of mine, but because of great people, it allows you to have success. So one other comment on mentoring is just, you have to have the right people. And the right people starts with the right primary mentor, as I talked about earlier. But then some people I see just kind of get stuck with sort of this one mentor, and then they don't realize that, they could be learning a lot more if they had these other people. And so growing your mentoring team and growing it over time, I think, is a great way of getting some additional expertise and in building your collaborative network. You also have to remember that you're going to start becoming a mentor even while you are being mentored, right? So you may be a peer mentor to other people, in your division or department, or you may start mentoring, students, residents, fellows, etc. But just be careful not to take on too much. And one of the things that I've done with Dr. Michaels has been really helpful is we've done some co-mentoring as I got started. And that was really helpful for me to get a chance at mentoring, but also to get some feedback from him about, strategies to improve as a mentor, things that he's found successful, not successful in the past, to kind of prevent a few, wrong turns at the beginning. So another crucial thing is that you respect your mentor and you have a good mentor-mentee relationship. And so these are things that are just crucial for a mentee to understand. It's the mentee's responsibility to get scheduled meetings with their mentor and make sure those are on a calendar where you aren't going to miss them. The mentees need to be prepared. They need to be prepared and show up with a meeting agenda. They need to have followed up on the tasks that were discussed at the prior meeting. And the mentees need to remember that this is their project, right? So this is not the mentor's project. The mentor is volunteering their time to the mentee. And so that when stuff needs followed up on or a new skill is needing to be learned, that's the mentee's responsibility to jump on that and get it done. And similarly, when roadblocks occur, it's not the mentor's job to solve the roadblocks. The mentee should be working through those with the mentor there to give them feedback and some guidance. So always come with a solution, even if it's not what ultimately happens, come with a solution. And finally, there has to be respect, mutual respect for time and resources and effort and who owns what piece of the science. And so in conclusion here, just a few of the resources that I found were super helpful. So within the professional development core, the scholars program, as I mentioned before, this was absolutely critical. It gave me a huge amount of protected time that allowed me to really get my research going. It provided me with the resources to start to build a research team. It was really kind of the gateway to getting other grants was through all of the support that happened through the scholars program. It also plugged me in, with other people who are doing, at the same stage. And it's been really helpful to see kind of their progression as well. The research studio was another thing that was really helpful. I did this before my VA Career Development Award. Was basically we looked at some of the feedback from the K-23 award, and then we had both local experts as well as some external experts who reviewed my revised proposal as well as some of the summary statements and gave me tremendous feedback that was helpful for that VA Career Development Award. And then the seminar series such as this are great ways of learning new topics. Within the biostatistics and epidemiology core, I've had fantastic statistical collaboration. So Dr. Yu has been kind enough to meet with me monthly over the last few years, as a lot of our work is very heavy on biostatistics. And it's been fantastic to bring output and walk through output or coding issues or all sorts of statistical aspects that she's provided great mentorship in. There's also been some fantastic statistical workshops that have been offered. And then finally, the Crane database has been really helpful for some pilot and feasibility studies. So I will stop there and just want to give a shout out again to my mentor who's been fantastic and has not run away yet, and my awesome research team, and then all the support from the IDeA-CTR.
Thanks, Bryant. Evidence that people can succeed, really even with marginal mentoring. So, thanks for that. So we're going to turn the page to Dr. Hwang from the Department of Psychiatry here at UNMC, and one of many of our scholar success stories. So, Soonjo?
Yeah, sure. Can you see the slides well?
Yeah, they look great. Okay,
so yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. And when I was talking about giving this talk, I was gearing towards sharing my experience, especially with the young investigators, to the pathway to become an independent researcher. I wouldn't call myself as a established independent researcher yet, but I think I'm on that pathway. So I wanted to share that information for sure with the young investigators, and also, there's still some areas that I'm still struggling with. So if there's any established the researcher in the audience, then I'll ask for their advice as well. And I'll try to be complimentary to Brian's talk, which was amazing. So it could be a complimentary. So these are the current funding sources that I'm getting the support for, but I'll probably do a very little talk about the actual projects or science that I've been doing. So reiterating the objects of this talk. So basically, I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I started my career as a clinician, and I still see myself as a clinician. And the research projects that I've been doing, I aim to have a clinical utility in that. I'm sure that Bryant has a similar purpose in his research. So I do have an interest in pediatric population with behavioral and emotional disorders and the struggling with them. It's a non-trivial issue in society. There's a huge burden on the adolescents and children struggling with it, and then have an impact on their life academically and their home and the community. So we are doing a better job, but we're still struggling in terms of the providing good care. So that's where I started, to looking at the ways to work on it, and research is one way to do it, and neuroscientific approach has been my interest. So that's what I've been doing in our lab and the department. So my career trajectory, again, as I said, I started as a clinician. As I was doing my fellowship in Boston, I became interested in this population because, we still don't have a really good understanding, not to mention the good tools to provide, to make them better. We're talking about children and adolescents struggling with the day-to-day emotional and behavioral dysregulation. I started some small projects during my the fellowship and training about the school bullying. And my mentors, Dr. Leventhal and Dr. Kim, they both are now at UCSF, mentioned that there's some training program that I can tap into to have a better understanding of this psychopathology in a neuroscientific way. So lesson number one, just like Brian, it's important to have a really caring and mentor who has a vision, because I never visioned myself as a becoming an independent researcher, but somehow they saw that potential, so they connect me with this training program at the National Institute of Mental Health, and so I was trained there for a while before coming here for the neuroscience and the neuroscientific understanding of this population. So I bet some of you have been to the NIH campus. It's originally a farmhouse, and my office was actually in that farmhouse, the second floor, which was pretty fun. So that was for 3 years, and these are the trainees. Excuse me, the right person, the Joyce Chung is the director of the training program, and the left person, Marilyn Powers, the clinical director. You see that there's about 13 or 12 trainees, and then all of them are medical doctors. Out of those, currently, the people who are still pursuing the research career is 3 of them. Even at the high level of a training like NIMH, that's the first thing that potentially we have some time to talk about, is that, especially for the clinicians like MDs, it's extremely difficult to pursue the clinical, the research career. And even like people who are interested in landing on NIMH, and they ended up, not pursuing it. So I think, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, that how to kind of, support the research career, because we need the, people with the clinical background and experience. So after that, I came to Nebraska in end of 2015. I started the IDeA-CTR scholarship 2017 and graduated in 2020. During that time, I was able to get a tremendous support, and I can't express my gratitude enough. I started just by myself, and then during that time, I was able to build up the team. So nurse practitioner, postdoc, research assistants, and the person who's dealing with the business and financial aspects. So it's been really incredible journey, and lucky enough to have these people on board. So again, I think, Bryant laid out pretty well of, what are the sources that we were able to get from the IDeA-CTR program. And what are the things that, was able to help me out. So I just want to start by kind of like, I thought about what is the key aspects of the work that, the career work that, make me kind of relatively successful so far. So I've been thinking about it. So I just wanted to lay out those, sharing experience with the young investigators, and then maybe get some feedback from the established researchers as well. So this is probably pretty obvious that you need to work hard. I've never seen any successful researcher who's not working hard. So none of us work at 40 hours a week. And also, just the Bryant laid out, you need to keep trying. If you see a CV of a successful people, it's pretty impressive, but I'm pretty sure that if you actually add everything you've tried and failed in your CV, probably it's going to be 10 or 20 times thicker. Yeah, that's just something that I think about a lot, because research career is just a snapshot of a very narrow point where you feel happy and rewarded for your success because you get the grant, your paper published. But between those very small window, there's a whole darker area of a repetition of really hard work and the failure. So how do you motivate yourself to keep doing that? Is something that I don't have a good answer to. I mean, it's funny because I'm a psychiatrist and I don't have a good answer to that. But that's just something that I think about a lot. That you really need to keep up with the hard work. But reward is really great, and it really keeps me going. But again, it's a really small parts of your work, and then it's filled up with the kind of repeating what you've been doing. With that, one of the advice I got from many mentors, and it still stuck with me, is that practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. With that, I think I've been thinking about a lot, and that hard work has to be geared towards making progress. If you just keep repeating, that's not going to making you move forward. Then you're just kind of wasting your time and energy. So how to keep you being smart about your effort, because again, even if you're working really, really hard, you still have a limited time and effort you can allocate. Is something that I've been thinking about a lot. That the hard work is really required, about how you're going to do that so that it doesn't make permanent, but just not only make it permanent, but also make perfect. So that's the first part. Yeah, mentorship is a very important, again, as I said, early in my career, people just, put me in the path of this. So introduced me to be trained in NIMH. Dr. Chris Credoville, invited me to apply for the IDeA-CTR program. Dr. Zimmerman and Dr. Mickles, throughout my career, has been really helpful to become independent. So I think, finding right person in the right place is really important. And I can just empathize enough that, you need to work with them really well. I go back to the slide, building a good team, as Brian laid out, is another really important aspect. There, I'm still struggling. It's so funny that I'm a psychiatrist, but I'm kind of finding out that working with a team and keep motivating them and keep them just working towards the same goal. It's a challenge, and that's a skill that I'm learning every day. And I think that's probably I needed some advice along my career, that how to kind of keep your team maximizing the capacity to achieve the goal, and how to keep them interested and motivated. I think it's kind of still the day-to-day struggle. And of course, the collaboration is important, as Bryant laid out. At this era of research, you can't do anything just by yourself. One of my mentor, actually, who was working with me at NIMH, is now the director of the neurobehavioral research at the Boys Town, and we still have a pretty good and strong collaboration. It's a kind of complementary, because he's a neuroscientist, PhD, and I'm more like MD. So that kind of, filling each other's gap is really important in collaboration, and keep building up the network, and I think it's critical. So this is also something I thought about a lot, that, at the end of the day, if you want to be independent, then, you need to get the support to, having your effort and the research operation covered in terms of the financial support. And so you need to pursue some funding agencies such as, NIH or other, nonprofit organizations and such. And, back in the days in my early career, I was naive enough to think that, NIMH is a federal agency supporting the mental health research. And so, of course, if I have like a good enough, idea, then, they'll support it. And, well, I mean, to some extent, that's true. But at the same time, you have to understand that, they have their own agenda, and then just to find a way to reconcile with it. Because, if, it doesn't meet with their, say, mission statement, then it's going to be hard for them to support that. So for a good example, I mean, this is not my area, but for example, NIMH doesn't have any interest in supporting research on personality disorders, and it's been that way for a while, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be that way for a while. So if you're interested in doing research on personality disorder, probably your chance to get funded by NIMH is going to be very small. That being said, they have a hugely interested in mood disorders like depression, and those are overlapping quite a bit in terms of neurobiology and treatment and medication and whatnot with the personality disorder. So if you want to pursue the kind of funding of by the NIMH, then that's probably the way to go for that. Kind of making your research project towards that interest they have, so that you find a way of reconciling your interest with their interests. And that's what I found out quite a bit about my project, because I was doing the clinical trial of oxytocin for kids with irritability, and my original idea was getting R01 and completing that study in the larger scale. And as I was talking to the program officer there, I quickly realized that they actually have a more interested in the more fundamental kind of question about pharmacodynamics and the pharmacokinetics. So that's where the U01 idea came about. And as I proposed that way, they decided that it's a good idea to fund. And turns out actually it's going to be pretty complementary, because now that I have an intermediate response to oxytocin by clinical trial, then I will get some accurate response by this pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. So combining them, we'll have a pretty comprehensive understanding of how it works in the brain level. So that's going to work out pretty well. But again, I think we need to keep in mind that reconciling our interest and needs, and then their needs and interest. And this is probably something that I think about a lot, and I don't have any good answer, is that all those things are, kind of, how to say, necessary. It's not sufficient to be successful. And the last thing is that you have to be lucky, and you just have to have some fortune. I mean, I was hit by, really good and mentors who really do care about my career, and then, who even found out the potential that I didn't see to become an independent researcher, and guided me to the right directions. When I was arriving here, that's about a time that IDeA-CTR was looking for scholarship applicants. So it was really good timing. And as I was applying for the NIH grant, their program officer at the program was looking for, doing that kind of projects with the U01. So I got lucky, I have to say. And I don't know how to make yourself lucky, but I think that's probably really critical part of becoming a successful researcher. So that's I just wanted to lay out for sure. I guess I have to say that that makes me feel like humble, because although I really put a lot of effort and work hard and try to work smart, at the end of the day I just got lucky, and So it just make me feel like humble about it. So I think that's about it. These are people who I still been working a lot with each other and as a team and collaborator and mentors, and I really appreciate their help. And yeah, so I guess we can move on to questions or discussion. Thanks.
So thanks to both of you. That was you may say you're junior, but you're giving advice that feels very senior. So really appreciate both of your insight. Maybe I'll start with a question for you guys, and I guess thinking back, what surprised you in terms of skills that maybe you needed that you weren't prepared for? What things are many trainees maybe not? What's not on their radar often that maybe should be? Any thoughts there, Bryant?
Yeah, so I think I can think of two. So one is, scientific writing. So when I went into science, way back as a, high school or college person, I did it because I never wanted to write another paper in my life. And I was like, I'll take as many multiple choice tests as you give me, but I'm not going to write any more papers ever again. And that did not work out so well, clearly. And so, the key there is just writing. And again, I bought some books on how do you write well. And then I found this mentor who would turn everything red. And, you have to handle that, right? You have two ways of looking at that. You can become depressed and say, oh my goodness, I really stink, I'm going to give up. Or you look at it with the framework of, wow, this person really spent a ton of time and effort into carefully thinking about this to make me better. And so I'm going to take that feedback and I'm going to become better. And I'm going to send a draft that's only slightly better next time so that I can hear more great feedback.
Yeah, I will probably expand that. I think, writing is really important. And it's a funny, because, I'm thinking about sort of like, in the field of like liberal education that, how to form your thoughts in a really constructive way, in a logical way, so that you can follow a thread and then you can put in the writing, and then how to make like a convincing and persuasive argument when you're having debate with other people. And this is all in the realm of a liberal education. It's funny because there is a more and more emphasis on like some technical like skills, science, parts of the education, but I think, these are the ones that I struggle to learn, like, how to kind of like form my thoughts in a kind of constructive way so I can, relate it well to people in a persuasive way. And then, again, as I said, when I'm making some counter argument about the comments and feedback, how I'm going to do that well. So that's one part. The second part is, again, I brought it up during my presentation, that how to like work with people. I mean, it's so funny that I keep saying I'm a psychiatrist, but like, for example, I have this team of like research assistants and a postdoc and such, and how do I keep them interested and motivated? And then, how to just convince them we're working on the common goal and maximize their capacity. And I think that's a skill set, I never learned, and I'll probably struggle for the rest of my career. But those are the things probably, I mean, they're key to your success. It's just that, you didn't get to learn about them.
Yeah, getting an MD did not include HR training. Yeah, absolutely. There's a question in the chat box here. It's a great question about maybe training resources that may be available. And I'll add a little to that, asynchronous opportunities that maybe you two have found helpful, that really work well for people, or maybe better for people who have very busy schedules. Do you have any recommendations there, in a broad sense for training opportunities?
So maybe I can start because I was working at the NIMH a little bit. So that depends on the kind of a training level that you are. So if you are just getting out of the college education, NIH has something called IRTA, I-R-T-A. I forgot what's the acronym for, but it's basically at the level of a research assistant. But if you apply for that, then, they will connect you with the, like world-renowned established researchers in NIH, and then you will get to work with them in their lab. just get your hands dirty with the basics of the research. And of course, tons of opportunity for publication, presentation, networking. So if you're just getting out of the college, and that's probably something that you can pursue. For the the higher level, like let's say MDs or PhDs, of course they have a clinical and then research fellowship. NIMH does that for sure. I'm not sure about the NCI or other agencies, but there are opportunities that you can again tap into. This is kind of a postdoc program you can do at the NIH, and of course for all of them you have to move to the DC area. I'm not sure there's any other like online programs available. I do know that actually there's a neuroscience training program that you can do online, but yeah, so those are the things that I can think of.
So the NIH they maintain an introductory to clinical research course online. I think it has something like 16 or 20 modules that are usually a recording of an NIH person giving a talk, and then with some accompanying text that you can go through. And I think if you complete it all, you can get a certificate. In terms of things on campus, the Mentored Scholars Program I'll make another plug for. It's led by great people, and it provides you with, the core courses that are needed to develop some clinical and translational research skills. The other things that are really attractive about that program are, one, you're brought in with a cohort, so you have an instant peer mentoring network. And the other piece is that there are some pilot funds that are set aside specifically for people in the MSP program. So another plug, you still have time to get your application in. I think it's 6 weeks or something until they're due. And then also just remember, this is the era of Coursera or edX or whatever. I mean, anything you could want to learn, there is an online course for $50 or $100 these days.
An example of what Bryant just said is, and Bryant's been instrumental in making this happen, but in rheumatology, we often have trainees, and one of the resources we have are data sets, but you have to be able to know how to play in the playground to be able to, take advantage of those. And so one of the things we've done with, very junior trainees is have them take some intro stats kind of things that have some practical application. How do I use this program to ask a question? That are available online. I think there's one, Bryant, you can correct me. I think there's one by UCLA. There's one put together by Stanford that do this and are geared toward people kind of early in the trajectory, and really can help, kind of start helping them think about asking questions. And so it's really, I think, as Soonjo said, really you have to target those for the audience. Where are they in the trajectory? And if you overshoot and put someone in a training course they don't belong in, it can really have, in my experience, a really counterproductive effect. So you have to be very careful about your targeting. I don't see any other questions. I think Dr. Zimmerman and Dr. Mannon, who lead the CTR, are appreciative of you guys calling out. Oh, she's saying something there. She says applications due April 30th. Did I read that right? April 30th. And
I didn't know if you'd let me speak, but while you're talking, just one quick thing. A lot of the journals now, the scientific journals now have fellowships for learning how to be an editor and be on the editorial board. And I would suggest that, though it may be premature for some of you, it's really a unique opportunity to work with someone more senior you've never met across the country, learn how papers are reviewed, learn about implicit bias, and give you an opportunity to build your CV. And maybe, like, one of my editorial fellows is going to be on the editorial board. He's been fantastic. I have done very little. He's like the Bryant England of the American Journal of Transplant, Bryant. And I nominated him for the editorial board, and the editor-in-chief said, this guy is good. So that's one thing I thought of. But yes, the application deadline is April 30th. It was in the Today, UNC Today. If you're like me, you probably looked and just deleted it, but don't.
Yeah, and also I'll add that, all the study sections in the NIH are always looking for some young investigators, to be their kind of the study review member. And I think it's probably the most valuable experience, just to how the review process goes. Because, they're going to, scientific review is going to be the ones, who decide it's going to be funded or not. So, and then they always give the priority to the young investigators, to be on board with it. So if you have any opportunity, I would suggest grab it for sure.
So there's one last question that I'll try to field myself quickly. But Jared Hanslone asked a question about connecting to mentors, and what kind of tools might be available for that. That's a challenge, and I think Jared appreciates, what a challenge that can be. And everyone who's in a junior position who's scraping and clawing, appreciates that challenge as well. And so it's not easy necessarily, but we have tried to develop some tools, and Dr. Zimmerman and I, as part of the CTR Professional Development Corps, are in the process of hopefully developing some tools that will help facilitate that, sort of online tools. But that's not going to be the only answer for sure. Be on the lookout. The CTR supports, and I think other departments support mentor training activities. I think people tend to not value those kind of training activities, maybe like they should, with kind of working on the assumption, sort of like we talked with HR, that if you have an MD or you have a PhD, you automatically know how to mentor. That is not the truth. Training can really help that. And, and so there will be activities ongoing to target that. So I want to end there, being respectful of the hour. Thank Soonjo and Bryant for wonderful talks. Really appreciate it. A lot of wisdom in those talks. And thank everybody for participating. So hope everybody has a great weekend.